The moment I saw Melissa's face at the party, I knew something was off. We had just announced that I was pregnant, and while most of the family was congratulating us, there was one person who couldn't hide her bitterness, my sister-in-law, Melissa. She stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching us with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The look she gave me wasn't the kind you give someone who's just shared good news. It was the kind you reserve for a rival. Ethan and I had been married for 2 years. Our wedding was a whirlwind, but everything felt perfect. Sure, we had our disagreements like every couple does, but when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't have been happier. Ethan was thrilled, too. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lurking just beneath the surface, and it was connected to Melissa. I tried not to pay her any attention, especially as the night went on. I thought the worst was behind me after the announcement, but things quickly escalated. Every time Melissa passed by, she seemed to give me a sharp, almost accusatory glance. She didn't congratulate me. In fact, she barely acknowledged me. That should have been my first warning. As the evening wore on, I noticed Melissa retreating further and further into the shadows. She wasn't joining in the conversations, wasn't smiling like everyone else. She was plotting something, I could feel it. And whatever it wasn't good. But I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to make my life miserable. Later that night, as Ethan and I were talking to some close family friends, I saw Melissa whispering to someone at the bar. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. I couldn't make out the words, but the way she kept glancing over her shoulder told me whatever she was discussing wasn't meant for my ears. Then, without warning, she made her move. I was standing near the cake table, laughing at something someone had said, when I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my stomach. It wasn't a cramp, it was a stabbing sensation, deep and immediate. I gasped, clutching my abdomen, and everyone around me stopped talking. Ethan's face went white as he rushed to my side. "What's wrong?" he demanded, his voice shaky with concern. I could barely answer, the pain overwhelming me. My heart raced, and all I could think about was the baby. I was terrified. I managed to whisper, "I don't know, it hurts." Melissa, who had been standing across the room, was suddenly at my side. But there was something in her eyes, something cold and calculating. Instead of offering to help, she stepped back slightly, watching me with a strange, almost detached expression. "Maybe you're just too excited," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Pregnancy can do that to you." I wanted to scream, but the pain was too much. My vision blurred, and all I could do was clutch Ethan's hand as he helped me to a chair. It felt like everything around me was spinning out of control. "Get her to the hospital," Ethan ordered, panic creeping into his voice. "Now." I barely remember the ride to the hospital. Everything felt like it was happening in a blur, too fast, too frightening. By the time we arrived, I was pale, sweating, and shaking. I was in and out of consciousness, only half aware of the doctors and nurses rushing around me. As they ran tests and monitored me, Ethan was beside himself. He kept asking what had happened, what was wrong. But the only thing I could think about was Melissa. What was she up to? Why did she seem so calm, almost indifferent? And why had she been the one to make that comment when I was in pain? It wasn't until much later that I would realize how deeply Melissa's jealousy had run, and just how far she was willing to go to hurt me. But that night, as I lay in the hospital bed, all I knew was that something was terribly wrong. And I had no idea how close I was to the storm that was about to hit my life and my family. I wish I could say that everything after the hospital visit went back to normal, but it didn't. The doctors told me I was fine, that the pain had likely been caused by stress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And as much as I wanted to focus on the joy of being pregnant, every time I looked at Melissa, I felt a knot in my stomach. Ethan and I had talked about it in the days that followed. He kept assuring me that Melissa wasn't worth worrying about, but I knew him too well. He didn't want to believe that his sister was capable of something like that. I had always known Melissa was a bit difficult, but never in my wildest dreams did I think she could be malicious enough to hurt me. But the more I thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. The way she had looked at me at the party, like I was an obstacle she needed to get rid of. the way she had been so detached when I was in pain. I couldn't shake the suspicion that something was off, and I wasn't the only one. A few days after the party, I overheard a conversation between Ethan and his best friend, Mark. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help it. They were in the living room, speaking in low voices. Ethan sounded frustrated, and Mark's tone was sharp, almost angry. "Dude, she's not gonna let this go. She'll do whatever it takes to destroy your marriage," Mark was saying. "I told you, she's been jealous of you since you got married. And now you've got a baby on the way. She's not gonna just roll over and accept it." I froze. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. What were they talking about? Who were they talking about? Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. "I know, but I don't think she'd go that far. She's my sister." "She wouldn't." Mark interrupted him, his voice rising in frustration. "She already tried to sabotage your marriage before. She's not just gonna sit back and watch you live your happily ever after. And now you're having a kid? That's a whole other ballgame." I felt a chill run down my spine. Ethan had mentioned before that Melissa wasn't thrilled when he married me, but I had always brushed it off as sibling rivalry. Now, it was starting to feel like something much more sinister. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, going over everything that had happened in the last few weeks. Something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa was up to something, and I wasn't the only one who was starting to notice. The next morning, things took an even darker turn. Melissa showed up unannounced at our house. I was in the kitchen, making breakfast when I heard the doorbell ring. Ethan wasn't home, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a little taken aback. When I opened the door, there she was, standing with her arms crossed, looking at me with a knowing smirk on her face. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cold and distant. I felt a pang of unease. Something about her tone set me on edge, but I forced a smile and stepped aside. "What's going on?" She walked in, taking a seat at the kitchen table without waiting for an invitation. I stayed standing, unsure of what was about to happen. "You know," she said, her voice laced with bitterness, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you." I raised an eyebrow, not sure where this was going. "What's that?" "You think everything's going to be perfect now, don't you? That you and Ethan are just going to live happily ever after with your perfect little baby," she sneered. "But it's not going to be that easy." I felt my heart skip a beat. What was she talking about? She stood up, taking a few steps toward me. "You're just a little too naive for your own good. You think Ethan's going to be a perfect husband and father? Please. He's going to leave you. He always does. He's not capable of being the man you think he is." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What are you trying to say, Melissa?" She stepped closer, her eyes cold and calculating. "What I'm saying is, you've got a target on your back now. You're pregnant, and Ethan's getting all wrapped up in you. And I'm not going to sit back and watch you ruin everything I've worked for. Not when I can stop it." The words hung in the air, thick with venom. I didn't understand what she meant by ruin everything I've worked for, but I could feel the malicious intent behind her words. "Melissa, what are you planning?" I asked, my voice shaking with both fear and confusion. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not planning anything," she said. "But don't think I won't do what I have to do to make sure you don't get everything you want." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to call Ethan, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I could feel the tension building between us, but Melissa wasn't done. "I just wanted to make sure you understood one thing," she said, turning to leave. "You'll never be good enough for him. Not in his eyes. And when the time comes, when you lose that baby or something else happens, don't say I didn't warn you." The door slammed behind her, and I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. I had no idea what she meant, but one thing was clear. Melissa wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. After Melissa's ominous visit, a sense of unease settled over me like a storm cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was plotting something, though I had no concrete proof. Ethan reassured me time and again, telling me to ignore her, but I couldn't help noticing how her insults and mind games had started to escalate. Something was brewing, I just didn't know what. Days turned into weeks, and the family barbecue we had planned loomed closer. It was a casual affair meant to bring everyone together, but the thought of hosting Melissa in our home made my stomach churn. Still, canceling would seem suspicious, and I didn't want to tip her off. The day of the barbecue arrived with bright skies and a palpable tension in the air. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing appetizers, while Ethan set up the grill outside. Guests began arriving, filling the patio with laughter and conversation. Melissa, as expected, was fashionably late. When she finally walked through the gate, she was dressed to impress in a bold red dress and heels, not exactly backyard barbecue attire. Her entrance was dramatic, as always, with her arms full of a fancy fruit platter she placed on the table like it was a masterpiece. "Well, isn't this cozy?" she cooed, her eyes scanning the setup. "Ethan, you've really outdone yourself." Her compliments were barbed, as usual, but I forced a polite smile and kept my distance. For the first hour or so, everything went smoothly, at least outwardly. But Melissa's presence was a thorn in my side. She hovered around Ethan, monopolizing his attention and slipping in veiled digs whenever she got the chance. At one point, she cornered me near the drink station. "You must be exhausted," she said, her tone laced with fake concern. "I've heard pregnancy can be tough for women who aren't used to handling stress." I bit my tongue, refusing to give her the reaction she was looking for. Instead, I refilled the lemonade pitcher and walked away. As the afternoon wore on, Melissa's behavior became increasingly erratic. She made snide remarks about my cooking, loudly questioned the choice of baby names Ethan and I had been discussing earlier, and even hinted at our finances in a way that made several guests uncomfortable. It was clear she wanted to draw attention, and not the good kind. The turning point came just as the sun began to set. I was in the kitchen slicing fruit when Ethan's best friend, Mark, rushed in, his face pale. "You need to come outside," he said, his voice low. "Something's off." I followed him to the patio, where a small crowd had gathered near the drink table. The energy was tense, with murmurs rippling through the group. As I pushed through the throng of people, my eyes landed on the cause of the commotion, a small vial sitting on the edge of the table, half hidden behind a row of soda bottles. Ethan was holding it up, examining it with a furrowed brow. Melissa stood a few feet away, her face carefully neutral. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mark spoke first. "I found it tucked behind the drinks when I was grabbing a soda. I thought it was strange, so I brought it over." Ethan unscrewed the cap and sniffed cautiously. His face contorted in disgust. "This smells chemical. Definitely not something you drink." The murmurs around us grew louder, and Melissa's calm exterior began to crack. "I don't see what the big deal is," she said, stepping forward. "It's probably just a cleaning solution someone left out by mistake." Mark wasn't convinced. Why would a cleaning solution be hidden here, of all places? And why does the label look scratched off? Ethan examined the vial more closely. Indeed, the label had been tampered with, leaving only faint remnants of the original text. "This doesn't belong in the drink area, that's for sure," he said. Then he turned to Melissa, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know anything about this?" Melissa scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Why would I? I'm not your maid." But the crowd wasn't buying her nonchalance. Someone whispered, "Didn't Melissa bring the drinks over earlier?" Ethan froze, his face tightening as the memory surfaced. "You're right. Melissa, you offered to set up the drinks when you arrived. Is that when this ended up here?" The question was sharp, cutting through her defenses. Melissa's eyes darted around the group, her usual confidence faltering. "Are you seriously accusing me of tampering with drinks? That's insane." "No one's accusing you," I said, keeping my tone calm despite the adrenaline surging through me. "But this is serious. If someone tampered with the drinks, we need to figure out what's going on." Ethan nodded. "We should call the police and let them handle it." At that, Melissa's composure shattered. "You can't be serious," she snapped. "This is just a misunderstanding. Someone probably dropped it by accident." But the cracks in her story were glaringly obvious. As the tension mounted, Ethan took a deep breath and said firmly, "We're calling the police." If it's a misunderstanding, they'll clear it up. The crowd buzzed with a mix of shock, curiosity, and unease as I fumbled for my phone to call the police. Ethan stood protectively by my side, gripping the vial tightly. Melissa, who moments earlier had been smug and confident, now looked panicked. Her gaze darted from person to person, desperately searching for someone to come to her defense. "Ethan, you can't be serious," she exclaimed, her voice shrill. "You're really going to believe this? Over your own sisters?" Ethan's face was a mask of controlled anger. "You've crossed a line, Melissa. I don't know what this is, but we're going to find out." "I didn't do anything," she cried, her tone bordering on hysteria. "This is all some ridiculous setup. You're really going to let her manipulate you into thinking I'd hurt anyone?" Before Ethan could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the tense atmosphere. The police arrived swiftly, and the party guests parted like the Red Sea to let the officers through. One officer, a stocky man with a calm demeanor, stepped forward. "We received a call about a suspicious substance at this address. Who's in charge here?" Ethan stepped up, holding out the vial. "This was found hidden in our kitchen during a family gathering. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't belong here." The officer took the vial, examining it carefully before placing it in an evidence bag. "We'll need statements from everyone," he said, glancing around at the crowd. Melissa attempted to make a break for it, but another officer intercepted her. "Ma'am, we'll need you to stay put," he said firmly. "I don't know what's going on," she protested, tears streaming down her face. "Someone's trying to frame me." As the officers began questioning guests, I stood close to Ethan, my mind racing. What had Melissa been planning?
And why?
One of the officers pulled us aside. "Do you have any reason to believe the substance was meant to harm someone specifically?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, then glanced at me. "My wife is pregnant," he said slowly. "If that's some kind of poison or chemical," his voice caught, and I placed a reassuring hand on his arm. The officer's expression darkened. "We'll run tests on the substance. In the meantime, has this person, Melissa, shown any hostility toward you or your wife recently?" Ethan looked at me, silently asking if I wanted to share what had been happening. I nodded. "She's been difficult," I admitted. "She's made comments about our marriage, our baby. Today, she said something that felt like a veiled threat. And now this." The officer scribbled in his notebook, nodding. "Understood. We'll handle this." The party dissolved soon after. Guests murmured their goodbyes, clearly uneasy about what they had witnessed. Ethan and I sat on the couch in stunned silence after the police left, processing everything that had unfolded. The next morning, Ethan received a call from the police station. The substance in the vial had been identified. It was a toxic chemical commonly used in industrial cleaning. While the exact intent was still unclear, it was dangerous enough to warrant further investigation. Melissa had been taken in for questioning, and the more the officers dug, the more disturbing the situation became. She admitted to bringing the vial, Ethan told me, his face pale. She claimed she forgot it was in her bag, but they're not buying it. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Do they think she was planning to use it on me?" Ethan hesitated. "They're not ruling it out. But Melissa's story keeps changing. First, she said it was a cleaning agent she accidentally grabbed. Then she said she was holding it for someone else. The implications were chilling. Had she really been so desperate to undermine me that she would risk harming me, or worse, my unborn child?" Over the next few days, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Melissa's phone had been confiscated as part of the investigation, and what the police found on it was damning. Text messages, voice notes, even screenshots of internet searches, all pointing to a calculated plan to cause harm. "She was researching how to induce a miscarriage," Ethan said, his voice shaking as he read through the report. "She talked about spiking your drink. My God, she even sent someone a message about how convenient it would be if the baby was out of the picture." The room seemed to tilt as his words sank in. Melissa's jealousy and bitterness had festered to such an extent that she'd crossed into territory I never thought possible. Why would she do this? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. What did I ever do to her? Ethan pulled me into his arms, his grip tight. "It's not you," he said fiercely. It's her. She can't stand seeing anyone happy because she's so miserable with her own life. But she's not going to hurt you. I won't let her. Melissa was officially charged with attempted assault and endangerment. As the legal process began, details about her motives started to come to light. It turned out that her jealousy wasn't just about me or the baby. It was deeply rooted in her own personal failures. Her marriage to Tom was crumbling, her finances were in shambles, and she had been harboring resentment toward Ethan for years, feeling he had always been the golden child of the family. She saw me and our growing family as the ultimate symbol of everything she lacked. In her twisted mind, taking me down was a way to reclaim control over her spiraling life. But her plan had backfired spectacularly, and now she was facing consequences she couldn't escape. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. While Melissa awaited trial, Ethan and I tried to piece our lives back together. The support from friends and family was overwhelming, but the scars Melissa left behind weren't so easy to heal. The days following Melissa's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Ethan and I were grappling with the idea that someone we had shared family dinners with, celebrated birthdays alongside, could harbor such malice. The police investigation dug deeper, peeling back layers of Melissa's life that revealed a level of desperation we hadn't anticipated. Ethan received another call from the lead detective handling Melissa's case. "We've got something new," the detective said. "Melissa's financial records show significant debt, credit cards maxed out, unpaid loans, and some concerning transactions. It looks like she had paid someone to procure that chemical." "Paid someone?" Ethan's voice hardened. "She didn't act alone?" "That's what we're trying to determine. There's a series of payments to an account tied to a known figure in illegal substances," the detective explained. "We're following the trail." The weight of the conversation settled like a stone in my chest. Melissa's actions weren't just an impulsive act of jealousy. They were premeditated, calculated, and involved dangerous people. This wasn't just a family conflict, it was something far darker. As Ethan relayed the conversation to me, his face clouded with guilt. "How did I not see this coming?" he asked, pacing the living room. "How could I let her into our lives, our home, when she was capable of this?" "You couldn't have known," I said gently, though my own doubts lingered. "No one could have imagined it would go this far." Ethan stopped and looked at me, his jaw clenched. "But I knew she was unhappy. I knew she resented me, resented us. I should have done more to keep her at a distance." I reached for his hand, pulling him to sit beside me. "Ethan, you can't blame yourself for her choices. Melissa made her decisions. This isn't on you." He nodded slowly, but the shadows in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. The trial began a month later, and the courtroom was packed. Family, friends, even curious strangers who had heard about the case filled the benches. Ethan and I sat together in the front row, an unspoken agreement that we needed to face this head-on. Melissa appeared in court looking disheveled and uncharacteristically meek. Gone was the woman who had flaunted her confidence at family gatherings, replaced by someone who seemed acutely aware of how far she had fallen. Her lawyer presented her as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the brink by financial struggles and emotional instability. But the evidence against her was damning. The prosecutor laid out the timeline with chilling precision. The purchase of the chemical, the internet searches on inducing miscarriages, the text messages to a contact she had paid for the vial. Melissa's motive was clear: to destroy the happiness she couldn't have. She believed, the prosecutor said, that by harming her brother's wife and unborn child, she could regain a sense of control in her spiraling life. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated, calculated attempt to cause harm. The most shocking moment came when the person Melissa had paid to procure the chemical was brought in to testify. A wiry man with a nervous demeanor, he recounted their transactions in chilling detail. "She told me it was for a personal matter," he said, avoiding eye contact with the jury. "But she was very clear about what she wanted. No questions, just results." Melissa's lawyer tried to paint her as desperate, manipulated by her circumstances, but the jury wasn't swayed. The cold, Hard facts of her actions spoke louder than any excuses. When the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts, including attempted assault and endangerment, a collective breath seemed to escape the courtroom. Melissa was sentenced to several years in prison, a punishment that felt both just and deeply tragic. In the aftermath of the trial, Ethan and I tried to move forward. But the scars Melissa left behind weren't just emotional, they had changed the way we viewed the world. Trust, once freely given, now came with hesitation. Family gatherings were strained, the once tight-knit group fractured by Melissa's betrayal. Tom, Melissa's husband, filed for divorce shortly after the trial. He admitted he had seen red flags in her behavior, but had never imagined she was capable of such harm. She hid it well, he said during one of our rare conversations. Too well. Despite the chaos Melissa had caused, Ethan and I were determined not to let her actions define our lives. The baby we were expecting became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found. Months passed, and life slowly regained a sense of normalcy. Ethan and I prepared for the arrival of our baby, focusing on the future rather than the past. But there were moments, quiet, unexpected moments, when the weight of what had happened would resurface. A comment from a friend, a news article about a similar case, or even a casual mention of Melissa's name would bring back the memories. One evening, as we sat together in the nursery, Ethan turned to me. "Do you think she'll ever understand what she did?" he asked, his voice soft. I thought for a moment, staring at the tiny crib we had lovingly assembled. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I hope so. For her sake, and for ours." The day our baby was born felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I held our daughter for the first time, all the fear and pain of the past year seemed to fade away. She was perfect, innocent, and untouched by the darkness that had threatened to consume us. Ethan stood by my side, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at our daughter. "She's our fresh start," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, knowing he was right. Melissa's actions had nearly destroyed us, but they hadn't won. We had come through the storm stronger, more united, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.